We have Joe McLeod with us in studio. Joe is a Vancouver Park Board manager of urban forestry. Joe, hi there. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Gloria.
You know, I drove through the park yesterday, well, just the causeway, especially that section just before the Lionsgate Bridge, just south of the Lionsgate Bridge. It is jarring to see those giant trunks and no more trees at the end of them. What has been the scope of this project?
Yeah, so I'll just clarify. We haven't removed 160,000. There's been 160,000 trees that have been killed by the looper moth.
Oh, I
insect.
see.
So
okay. I was looking at you when I was saying that number. I was saying, really? Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, no problem. So there's approximately 600,000 to 700,000 trees in the park. So 25 to 30% of the trees were killed by the looper moth, and that's primarily hemlocks, western hemlocks. So there's other species that exist in the park, Douglas fir, western red cedar. However, the trees that have been killed here, the majority of them are small diameter trees, so less than 8 inches diameter, and only about 20,000 of those dead trees are greater than 8 inches in diameter. So with respect to what's been happening, we've been removing the dead trees that are posing a public safety risk with an intent to replant and reforest the park in the areas treated.
So the actual number then, so if it's less than 8 inches diameter,
20 centimeters.
20 centimeters, then you just leave them. They're just dying. They're just dying in the spot. You don't have to cut them.
We are removing some of them where it presents, because the other risk other than public safety is a wildfire risk. So where there's dead trees, typically they will fall over time, and then that results in a higher likelihood of a spark or something of that nature causing an ignition and a wildfire spreading. So in this case, we're targeting those smaller trees for wildfire mitigation risk purposes, and then also targeting the larger trees for public safety risks.
Still a massive endeavor.
It's been a massive endeavor, and it will continue to be an endeavor for probably another 2 to maybe 3 years after this year. And we're focusing our work outside of the nesting season, meaning the period between September and March, so that we minimize any impacts to nesting birds and other wildlife.
I see. So, okay, why will it continue to be a problem then? You haven't, the looper moth is still in our midst, or what do you mean?
It will continue to be a challenge for us to manage, in the sense that the amount of capacity that we've had to address this has been such that we've only been able to maybe address about 20 to 25% of the areas that have been impacted. And we've focused our efforts in this first phase of work on the highest use areas. So the highest use area by far is the causeway, where tens of thousands of vehicles move through that space on a daily basis. So our initial efforts have targeted that and some of the higher use areas in the park. So the next phase will progressively address other high use areas, and
more trees will come down.
More trees will come down. So this is it's a native moth. It's endemic to the region, and when looking at the historical documents for Stanley Park, it looks as though this moth has been impacting the park going back to the early 1900s. And at that time, unfortunately, the preferred treatment was spraying the park with lead arsenate.
Really?
And as to I think that went out of vogue very quickly, and fortunately, softer touch approaches have been used. But
lead arsenic, wouldn't that? I mean,
it's obviously
remnants. That sounds toxic, completely toxic.
A very heavy-handed approach, and there are other options for treating, which is a biopesticide, but we elected not to use that because it doesn't target a single species, and it will kill all other butterflies and moths. So we thought that just really wasn't the best approach to take here.
Okay, so how are you sure that the approach you are taking is the best approach then?
Well, with respect to the amount of hemlock in Stanley Park, because there's been several natural occurrences that have occurred through the last century, including hurricane, gapping the name of the hurricane right now, but there was a hurricane in the 1960s. I believe it was Hurricane Frida.
Okay.
Now that I've got that. And also the major windstorm that impacted Stanley Park in 2006. The result of those big natural events was a loss of lots of trees. And hemlock, they're notorious as being, they have a high propensity to naturally regenerate. So because of that, there's a disproportionate amount of hemlock in the park relative to other species. So as such, the park was really almost ripe for a reset, an ecological reset, so to speak. So in this case, the hemlock looper, when there's an overabundance of a certain species, in this case hemlock, the hemlock looper have essentially moved from an outbreak on the North Shore across Burrard Inlet and jumped into Stanley Park. So,
Wow. And just by historic, while you were chatting there, it's Typhoon Frida in 1962. So you were right about
Perfect.
the 60s, and you were right about Frida. It was a typhoon at that point. So is the looper moth no longer an issue? Is it gone? Is it just off season, or what are your concerns about where it could head next?
So what happens is typically it has about a 15-year cycle. So about every 15 years or so, it will pop up. It usually lasts for 1 to 2 years. But I believe because we had such hot and dry summers over the course of a few years, the outbreak lasted 4 years in this case. So we've been monitoring, and based on what we saw last year, the numbers were significantly lower in Stanley Park this past summer. So our hope is that the numbers are right down and we don't see the hemlock looper impacting the park this year. And perhaps because we're planting less hemlocks, in fact, we're not planting any hemlocks, perhaps we won't see it for several more years.
So what are you planting then? I mean, those giant areas now that look completely bare, that used to be, very tight with hemlocks. That what happens next to those areas in terms of grow back? What kind of timeline are we looking at?
So we'll be starting tree planting next week. So we're planting western red cedar, Douglas fir, and also a smattering of other species such as grand fir, big leaf maple, vine maple, and we've had ongoing consultation and dialogue with our local nations, and feedback from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh has suggested planting some Pacific yew, which is very significant and has cultural significance to our local nations. So we're going to be planting some Pacific yew as well, in the hopes that we see a more resilient and diverse urban forest.
As a Vancouverite, I guess I have kind of a romantic view of Stanley Park, and I drive through or walk through and just feel that, oh, the tree's gone. Oh, there's bear there. As a professional, what do you see when you see those wide swaths of space where trees used to stand?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely jarring because, these majestic views of Stanley Park, it is, it plays a significant part for everybody's kind of conscious and subconscious mind that live or have visited the region, and I totally respect that and feel that same way. I guess what I want to get across is that forests are dynamic environments. They're never static, and they're always going to be impacted, whether it be by pathogens or storms or insects. So I think something to remind everybody of is that we are going to be planting trees. I think within the next few years, the park is going to look, vibrant and green and be regenerating. So it's going to be great.
Well, ever changing. I mean, I remember walking through and doing some live reports from Stanley Park in 2006 after the big windstorm. I mean, that was sort of on the other side, the Prospect Point side of the park at that point, but it was unrecognizable there, and it's grown back. We kind of forget about it at this point. Is that your hope for this big cull that you've done of the hemlocks?
Yeah, I guess in removing all the dead hemlocks in Stanley Park, it's similar but different than the wind event in the sense the wind event was essentially an overnight sudden event. It was binary, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas this has been occurring incrementally for 4 years, and we're really, really pleased to have sought some of the professional insights of the consultant community to guide the management and the long-term stewardship of Stanley Park. So I think there's an opportunity to create a more resilient and robust Stanley Park.
Well, we wish you well with that, Joe. We really do. We love that park.
Thank you so much. We also love the park and appreciate the community's patience, and thanks for having me today.
I can't wait for new trees to fill in those gaps because
me too. Absolutely.
It's kind of hard to look at in some places right now. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Gloria. Appreciate it.
That's Joe McLeod, Vancouver Park Board's Manager of Urban Forestry.